Right. Hello. Welcome to Menopause Chats. I'm Erin DeRuska. I'm very excited today to have with us Jay, and she will be talking about her story. So, hi, Jay. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Uh,
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your journey, your experience so far in this world of menopause.
I guess I'll start with a little background. I have stage 3 ovarian cancer. Last year in December, I had some really severe stomach pain, ended up having to go to the ER because they thought my appendix was rupturing. Got CT scan, MRI, ultrasound, everything under the sun just to look. Um, I had initially gone to my gyno for random cramps I was having, and this was back in January of last year. Um, I I went to him and told him my concerns. I was having random bleeding, just severe cramps. And I had been on birth control for 8 years at this point.
Oh,
So,
you're starting to speak up.
I
I don't
know
know if it's on my end or your end.
what I was just not normal for me. Said I was fine. Let me see. Uh,
And I might switch my Wi-Fi network too. Just everyone, this is
I
live.
switched mine just now to see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, everybody, we'll try that and see where it goes. Okay, so I heard you went to
Okay.
the doctor last year, so sort of where it started to break up was that you went to your gynecologist, and that's sort of when it started.
Yes. So I went to him. He didn't listen. He didn't give me an ultrasound, an MRI, nothing. He just dismissed it and said it was my birth control. So I had gone back to my initial surgeon who had did a surgery on my ovaries a few years ago. I had to have one removed because I had a borderline tumor on it. Well, she didn't really listen to me either, chalked it up to my birth control, and again, didn't give me an MRI or anything like that. Um, so then I went to the hospital in December. They didn't see anything other than the fact that my organs were inflamed. They didn't see like any of the cancer or anything like that. So they decided they were going to go in and do a laparoscopic surgery, see what was going on, and potentially take my other ovary out. So they went in February of this year on the 11th, and they ran into cancer immediately to the point where they couldn't even get to my uterus and ovaries without cutting through it. So they, stopped the surgery and they let me know as soon as I woke up what was going on. I had an appointment 2 weeks later where we talked about the game plan. They initially wanted to do chemo first and then do surgery. So I went to get a second opinion and they suggested surgery and then chemo. So it was just up to me basically to decide, do I want to do chemo and then surgery or surgery and then chemo? I ended up going with the other oncologist just because he was a lot more open. He knew how to like break down topics and stuff to where I could understand them. And he was very, very caring as well. So I ended up going with him, and his plan was to do surgery and then chemo. He talked to, I think, 10 or 12 of his other colleagues just to make sure. And I had surgery on March 13th of this year. They found out I was stage 3 during that, and they had to do a complete hysterectomy as well as repair my bladder because my uterus, ovaries, and bladder were fused together from it. They had to take out part of my small intestine as well as get some nodes off of my diaphragm. It took about a month and a half for me to recover from that, and then I started chemo. I am halfway through my chemo journey right now. I finished July 24th, so that's really exciting. But yeah, so I'm just in the middle of my journey right now, trying to get through it,
Yeah.
dealing with surgical menopause, which is
Yeah, so
rough.
tell maybe for those who don't know, like how is that different than, sort of just I'm aging and I'm going through menopause naturally?
So Yeah, so typically you would go through peri-menopause and then menopause. And it's more of a gradual change because your hormones, as you get older, they drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so surgical menopause is different when you get a hysterectomy, just because it onsets all at once
Right.
instead of gradually. So I was feeling mostly fine for like the first 4 or 5 days after surgery. I was in the hospital and I was, on medicine, pain medicine, and so I nothing happened. I was just in the hospital sleeping. But when I got home, I started to notice just I was all over the place. Mood swings, really big emotions, like not able to think things through without reacting. Like it was alarming. I went to my oncologist and told him what was going on, and he told me I needed to up my psychiatric meds because I can't be on estrogen.
Right.
And I can't be on estrogen because if anybody doesn't know, the cancer feeds off of estrogen. So,
Yeah, and in another episode, someone was talking similar. They had to go on an SSRI as
mhm.
a way to mitigate some of the symptoms versus also could not go on estrogen. But yeah, estrogen really impacts so much in our bodies that we don't realize.
Yeah.
Brain
It's,
being one of them as well, which is why like there might be like brain fog or like the mood kind of fluctuation
mhm.
like that. How are your symptoms now? Like how are you feeling related to, those symptoms at this point?
So it was really bad at first, of course, just because it was new. I
Yeah.
would get hot flashes. I couldn't sleep through the night. I'd wake up constantly sweating and just, even when I wasn't sweating, I would just wake up in the middle of the night. um, as well as the brain fog, like you had talked about. It's very hard to keep track of things now. It was a little difficult before just because of everything that was going on, but now there's a bunch going on and I can't seem to focus on anything. I'm also dealing with the trying to figure out my body changing. I definitely wasn't expecting for my mind to change as much as it has. I have a very different outlook on life now than I did before. It's unfortunately a lot more negative just because of all the big feelings that I have. But definitely the big emotions is probably the worst thing to adjust to. They're it's back and forth. I upped my psychiatric meds, so that's really offsetting a lot. But it's still, I just have days where I can't control my emotions or anything, and it's hard.
Yeah, and it's I was just watching something or I was actually reading something where you're talking about like using, sort of meditation and stuff as a way to kind of it will rewire your brain to be
Mhm.
able to handle sort of the things that come up. And this person was doing a study around like, how the people they were studying that including putting them in like an MRI machine and like watching their brains and what was happening and like,
Mhm.
over and it didn't even take that long. I want to say it was like 6 or 8 weeks that the person was more able to regulate how they were
Mhm.
their emotions in response to sort of external stimuli
Yeah, yeah.
with every day. um and the other thing I was listening to the other day was talking about just like how most of our thoughts are the same every day, and so it's like
Mhm.
I saw this really it made me laugh because the person was like, if you're like their little hack was that like if they were gonna think negative things about themselves, they would think of it in an English accent.
I love that so much. I'm gonna have to try that.
Oh, I like that. It's like, yeah, because then you're not going to listen to that, because it's not
Yeah,
your
no.
anymore.
I love that.
Like, shut up. That's not something that I would want to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one made me laugh. I was like, oh, I like that. I try to be fairly positive, but not on like the Pollyanna side of things. It's like I realize that, the things that are happening in the world and but I try to like shift, try to shift the ratio as much as I can. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things I heard in what you were saying is about like you went to doctors and like it sounds like and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording that maybe they weren't listening to you fully.
Yeah, no, definitely not. It was, just I've noticed a lot that a lot of healthcare providers are just so dismissive of women's issues. They just chalk it up to, oh, you're a woman, so like of course you're going to go through this, even though it's not normal, but we're just typically dismissed
Yeah.
because of you just because we're a woman
Yeah. And
or
it's not
women.
even like, even when you have female doctors, sometimes I think people think, oh, like if I have a woman doctor, it'll be different. Not necessarily, you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
My
my first primary care physician that I went to about menopause was sort of like, oh, I'm not going to talk to you about that. I'm like, what do you mean you're not going to talk to me?
yeah. Yeah. And one issue, like I talked about, or I guess the main issue with all of this for me, one thing that I really look back on, when I had the first surgery and they removed my first ovary, um, my doctor just, she wasn't necessarily dismissive, but she didn't really listen to me very much. She was just kind of like, "Oh, we're gonna do this," and I begged her for a hysterectomy, just because I had a really bad feeling about it, especially when I got back the results, and it was borderline, which doesn't mean benign. Um, so I was really alarmed about that, but she chalked it up to like, oh, well, you're so young, you might want to have kids when you're older and all that nonsense. And I did not expect that from a female doctor at all.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what I've, at least what I've read. I mean, I certainly don't have this experience, but, from reading that I've done of like, they really want to try to preserve people's right to have children. And it's like, but
Yeah,
if that should be like the individual's choice, right? Like
exactly.
I chose not to have children. That was my choice. Um,
Hmm.
and, at a certain point, I even remember like people being like, well, you'll change your mind. You'll change your mind. You get to
Yeah.
the age where they stop saying that.
Hmm.
um,
I got that all the time. It's very frustrating.
like, no, like this isn't, or it's sort of the what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to have children sort of thing?
Yeah, and a lot of it is like, oh, they're the light of your lives and you're gonna have so much fun. And it just never really seemed that fun to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't
Um,
deny people that experience, right? Like if that is
yeah.
your path and your experience and you want that, awesome, and also respect that like it's not the path for everybody.
Hmm.
And I
I
don't
was,
think some people, it's not that I hate children or I want to kick them when I see them or anything.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm not,
It
yeah.
wasn't, I didn't have that desire in me to, to birth first and foremost, and then
Hmm.
to raise. I feel like I could be the best auntie in the world.
Yeah, that's pretty much how I'm looking at it right now. Like I love my nieces and nephews to death. I try to see them as much as I can. It's just been, harder recently because I've been so tired, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely making an effort to do that. So that's been nice.
I'm curious if your doctors did they forewarn you about like the surgical menopause, like this is going to happen, what to expect, or was it
Yes.
like oh, by the way?
So my doctor, he did mention that I would end up going through surgical menopause and there was nothing I could do to stop it since I can't be on estrogen.
Yeah.
So,
And so yeah, it's like how do you mentally prepare for that, right? Like you were saying, like before, it's like
yeah.
if you're in perimenopause to menopause, it's this gradual, almost to the,
Hmm.
it's that analogy of like, a frog doesn't realize it's boiling in a pot,
Hmm.
boiling water. Like it's just, oh, it's just getting warmer in here. It's kind of how like going into menopause.
Yeah, exactly. That's
I don't
really what it
realize
feels
it. I mean,
like.
that was my experience where it's like, oh, I find out I'm postmenopausal when I like, and then looking back going, oh, all these things were related to perimenopause. And I just did wasn't
Hmm.
putting two and two together because I was in my 40s and I thought I was too young. Right. And the
Yeah.
doctors didn't put two and two together, especially if they're going to different doctors. Like, I don't, they're not all talking to one another. Whereas now I
Yeah.
feel like I have one doctor, sort of everything's going through her. She
Hmm.
specializes in menopause, which is amazing
Yeah.
because that's the other thing I found out like when I started to have this experience was like, oh, most doctors aren't trained in this. They get like an
Hmm.
hour of training. And who knows when they went to school, it may have been 20 years ago that they got an hour of training and
Yeah.
changed in 20 years. So it's yeah, it's just really fascinating to me. It's just why I
Yeah.
started this project because I was like, oh, like I want other people to realize that, one, and everyone's experience is different. There is not one person that like will have an identical experience to somebody else.
That is actually one of the things that I wrote down in my notes was that people have got to realize that not everybody goes through the same things whenever it comes to menopause or really anything in life. Everybody's got a story, and it's just how you handle menopause is just different for everybody.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for me is like I want to talk to people about like I do think our mindset makes a difference in how we
Mhm.
sort of handle things. I mean, to your doctor's points, to your point, like it's inevitable where it's going to happen if you are lucky enough
Yeah.
to live to an age that, is that has menopause, that will include menopause, because that's the other
Mhm.
thing too is that, the back, hundreds and hundreds of years, people didn't live that long to go through.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you make it this far, guess what? You get to go on this like experience, and it might be different for you than somebody else. And even like my mother's like, I don't remember having hot flashes.
Mhm.
And that is the thing you hear about.
Yeah. It's I have noticed that hot flashes is the main thing that people talk about, and they are awful.
Yeah,
Don't They are really bad, but that's not the only symptom that you can have, of course.
yeah, yeah. I mean, in my very first video that I posted, there was I have a book, and like the symptoms are like this thick in the book, like of all the different
Yeah.
types of things that could come up, and you're just like, wow, I had no idea. I had no idea. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up today? Anything we didn't touch on?
I am going to look at my notes real quick.
Ew.
Just to make sure. I did see a question that you had asked,
Yeah.
or that you had sent over, if there was something that I had wished I had known
Yeah.
earlier about this phase in life. I definitely wish I would have known just exactly how much I would change as a person. It's only been since March that I've really been in menopause, and I just feel like a completely different person. I do not feel how I was before menopause. My thinking patterns have changed. My outlook has been significantly more negative. I also cry a lot, which we all cry,
Yeah.
but it's like at the smallest inconvenience, I will just burst into tears, and it's really hard to get me to calm down. But also sometimes, I just don't recognize myself in the mirror. My body is changing, my mind has changed. I've noticed it's harder to lose weight
Mm.
as well.
Yeah.
And it's just really difficult to go to or to go through.
Yeah. And yeah, I hear that too of like, especially when you're like, I have this comparison of like sort of a before and after, right? So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
and now it's like, who do I want to be now? Right? Like, okay,
Hmm.
here's where I'm at, here's what I look like. Here's my body, here's, what
Hmm.
it is. And like, how can I love what I see now?
Exactly. I mean, to me, it feels almost like transitioning from your teens to like your early 20s, because you don't really know what's going on. Your
Right?
body's changing, your brain is still developing. You're thrust into adulthood. Some people with barely any knowledge at all.
Sure,
And
sure.
it's just, I mean,
And
it's
some
just
people don't
like,
get past that,
mhm,
right? Like,
exactly.
so it's like, oh, how can we sort of, ascend from that? There is research that talks about like when you think about a woman's journey, it's like, yeah, there's the, pre-puberty, right? Then there's puberty. And then
Hmm.
other, like, I mean, from like a hormonal shift, right? Is then
Hmm.
if you choose to get pregnant, that's going to cause, similar sort of like another hormone fluctuation. And then that's
Hmm.
menopause. I know neither of us went through the pregnancy route, but yeah, it's still that, that sort of same phase of like, oh yeah, and all of those hormones affect your brain. Like I remember I had a woman that worked for me, and she was a twin, and she'd had two kids already, and her twin had not had any children at the point. When her twin finally got pregnant, she was like, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, pregnancy brain's a thing.
Yeah.
She like was dismissing her sister's experience,
Hmm.
and she's like, I'm sorry. And so then when she went through her own experience, she's like, I apologize. Like this is the thing. But I think it's the same thing then that happens in menopause for people too, that sort of brain fog. We just don't. call it, just I guess they call it brain fog versus anything else. But like, I definitely have heard through, my lifetime of women who are pregnant talk about pregnancy brains.
Yeah, yeah.
It's similar kind of experience for people. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's just that, having to learn and love who you are now, because it's
Hmm.
just a different, I feel the same as like I have a different body. I also care a little less though. um
Honestly, me too. And I didn't really realize that until you just kind of said it. I'm like, yeah, I don't care as much about what people think about me. And I don't necessarily obsess over like how I look as much as I used to. Don't get me wrong, it still makes me upset,
Sure.
but it's just different now.
Yeah.
I just, I don't know. It's just difficult
Yeah, and I'm
sometimes.
someone whose weight has fluctuated my whole life. And so,
Hmm.
sometimes my body's bigger, sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's, tighter, sometimes it's
Yeah, I get that. I get
um,
that.
and so now I'm just like, I remember talking to somebody recently saying, I just, as long as my clothes fit,
Yeah.
a fitness competition, I don't need to be like, in a bikini at the beach. Like, I've never had flat abs. Like, I just feel like that journey is just, that's just not part of my life journey.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're comfortable with where you're at, you're comfortable with where you're at. And if you're not, then you can work to make it different. But
Yeah,
it's everybody's choice.
right, exactly. And it's like, and if somebody has a problem with the way that I look, I have to think of like, well, maybe that's your problem, not my problem.
Exactly. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of comments on my weight, on my head, because I had to shave,
Yeah.
my head because of chemo. And I've gotten positive and negative comments. I also sometimes get like weird looks when I walk around, like in the grocery store.
Yeah.
But like we talked about, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect me as nearly as much as it used to.
Yeah. And it's so, yeah, that's somebody else's issue, right? But I can see that
Hmm.
like, oh, I have to struggle with like who am I,
Hmm.
especially in this current, way I look or whatever, right? So
Hmm.
I think you look beautiful. So there you go.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
It's like, and everybody else can just go away.
Yeah, exactly.
Like trying like, how do I say this nicely?
Yeah, I used a much worse word in my head.
Sure,
That's for
sure.
sure.
Yeah, I had that in my head as well before what came out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, it has been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing your story with everybody. Um, Thank you, anybody who's watching or listening. Feel free to comment, share. If you are interested in participating in a future episode, please reach out to me. Happy to have you out. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. And thanks, Jay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.